Gender within comics. Here we analyze how gender is represented in superhero comics. America's progressive movement had a profound impact on the creator William Moulton Marston, that he created a character called Wonder Woman in 1991 as an inspiration to readers. He created a feminine character with all the strength of Superman plus all allure of a good and beautiful woman. Because the feminine archetype lacked force, strength, or power, and he believed that even girls never wanted to be that girl without force, strength, or power. But there were critics like Joseph Frank who believed that the scenes portrayed by these characters, that is the Wonder Woman, was not empowering but they were actually sexual. And Frederick Wartham, in his Seduction of the Innocent, argued that Wonder Woman is always a horror type. Though she is very powerful and tortures men, she is a cruel, phallic woman, meaning she had qualities of men. And that she may be a frightening figure for boys, but she is in reality undesirable for girls to be, or she is just opposite of what girl wants to be. And he argued that Wonder Woman challenged the traditional ideas of femininity. And many had different opinion about Wonder Woman, and this shows that complexities around gender and representations that emerge even when looking at only a single character. So, representation of women in superhero comics is controversial. Richard Reynolds identified comics as an exclusively male space rather than empower women or argue for change in comics. And he observed that superheroines was a pornographic fantasy figure solely aimed at male readers. He tells that superheroines are created mainly for male pleasure or male gaze. They wore revealing clothes and they resemble women from 1940s pornography. And he says that as females are objectified, they find it difficult to read these comics and thus it becomes a male space. He tells that the superheroines are actually male heroes in sexualized female bodies. So, Reynolds claims that female superheroes are simply male fantasies. They are created only for male readers, as he says that women never read these comics and women cannot really enjoy or identify with them. Here, the author disagrees with him. She asks that if female superheroes lack the specifically female qualities, and that if bravery, strength, and leadership are all male qualities, then what is essentially women qualities? So if you think that all these qualities are male qualities, then you might feel that the strong woman is treated as if she is behaving like a man. Reynolds reflects the traditional gender stereotypes, that is, men is portrayed as strong, active, courageous, and women as gentle, passive, and emotional. So, to disapprove Reynolds, the author gives the example of Kamala Khan, who is a Pakistani American Muslim teenage girl, the new Miss Marvel. Kamala Khan, by being a representative of women, teenagers, Muslims, and immigrants, challenges the old stereotype that all female superheroes exist only as sexual objects for men. So the character Kamala Khan or Miss Marvel challenges the Reynolds arguments that superhero comics are mainly for male readers, female superheroes are created as sexual objects for male fantasy, and women cannot really identify with or appropriate these characters. Because Kamala Khan contradicts these. She is designed with female readers in mind by the creators, especially Sana Amanat, and that she is not sexualized. She wears practical, modest clothing, and she is not also exaggerated, and she doesn't have sexually suggestive poses. and her appearance is not meant to function as pornography. Also, she represents diverse identities. That is, Kamala is a Muslim, Pakistani American, a teenager, and a girl balancing family, religion, school, and superhero life. So, the character Kamala is written by keeping in mind the women, female audiences, and not for the male gaze. And it shows that female superheroes can tell meaningful stories beyond being objects of male fantasy. Now, the approach to the female characters in the superhero genre is to focus on the violence against women as a motivation for the actions of male characters. The comic writer Gail Simone introduced the term women in refrigerators. It comes from a Green Lantern story where Alex David is murdered, placed inside a refrigerator. Simon noticed a pattern that women in superhero comics are often killed, raped, or tortured, and this was done simply to motivate the male hero. So, the women's suffering exists mainly to develop the man's story. And she also found another inequality that when male superheroes die, they usually return, regain their powers, and continues as heroes. And this shows an unequal treatment. A final approach to gender in relation to representations of the superheroine returns us to these figures, that is, these superheroines are made as a fantasy for specifically male readers. Carolyn Kuka studied the superhero artwork and found that female characters are often drawn in impossible poses. That is, a woman is shown with both breast and buttocks visible at the same time. In reality, the human spine cannot twist like that, and these poses exist only to make women appear sexually attractive. And this is another example of the male gaze. Some artists responded to this sexism creatively. They drew male superheroes in the exaggerated sexy poses usually given to women, and they drew female superheroes in realistic heroic poses usually reserved for men. And the result was humorous but also exposed the sexism in comic art. The modern gender studies don't only study women, they also study masculinity. And researchers ask how these men are expected to look and what counts as being manly, and etc. And here came the character Flex Mentallo, who is an unusual superhero. He began as a parody of all bodybuilding advertisement. All that showed a weak, skinny boy bullied on the beach who becomes muscular after bodybuilding. But here, Flex Mentallo exaggerates this idea. He wears leopard print trunks, high boots, ankle bracelets, making masculinity appear theatrical rather than natural. And Brooker argues that the character questions bodybuilding culture, superhero ideals, ideas of masculinity, the male gaze, and even the queer identity. So, instead of celebrating the perfect male body, Flex Mentallo makes readers question why society values that body so much. So this shows that the characters like Flex Mentallo question the traditional ideas of what it means to be a man. So now when we move beyond superheroes to the study of readership, British girls and boys comics and gender, researchers like Mel Gibson argue that comics were traditionally seen as being written by boys for boys, with female readers often treated as trespassers in the genre. Both William Moulton Marston and the creators of British girls comics believed in the idea of tabula rasa. That is, the children are like blank slates whose attitudes and behavior can be shaped by what they read. Comics were therefore seen as a powerful tool for influencing young readers. They shaped not only femininity but also masculinity. British girls comics such as Bundy, Girl, Jackie, Twinkle, Misty, all these promoted a particular model of girlhood based on traditional gender roles. Girls were encouraged to value education, family, caregiving, and careers considered suitable for women such as nursing, teaching, and becoming an air hostess. In contrast, boys' comics such as Eagle, Tiger, Victor, and Wizard encourage patriotism, science, technology, adventure, and the ideal of becoming a responsible citizen and national hero. Interestingly, although comics were often criticized as a harmful medium, British girls' comics were regarded as good because they were believed to teach proper behavior and moral values. The representation of girlhood was not uniform. It differed according to factors such as class and more broadly, gender is shaped alongside other social categories such as race, ethnicity, disability, and class. For example, girl largely represented middle class girlhood, whereas Bunty focused on the experiences and struggles of working class girls. Thus, these comics presented different social constructions of girlhood rather than a single universal experience. Even the titles of the comics reflected gender stereotypes. Boys' comics had titles such as Tiger, Victor, and Wizard suggesting strength, achievement, and action, while girls' comics had titles such as Girl and Bunty emphasizing specifically feminine identity. And now, when we focus on to the creators, editors, and publishers of these British comics, we find that most of them were men, even in comics produced specifically for girls. Publishers assumed that these male writers and artists understood girls' interests and could create stories for them without actually consulting the girl readers. As a result, the representation of girlhood was largely shaped from an adult male perspective. This is evident in Benita Brown's description of the D.C. Thompson Safari, where predominantly male editors traveled around Britain twice a year to meet creators and decide the storylines for the next 6 months. This illustrates that male editors had the authority to shape both the narratives and the construction of girlhood, while the opinions of actual girl readers were largely ignored. During the 1970s, the content of girls' comics became darker and more emotionally intense. The Benita Brown story Blind Bettina, in which the heroine was blind and she was ill-treated by her aunt and uncle, and she suffered a lot, and in the end the heroine's guide dog dies. This reflects that this shift towards stories filled with suffering and hardship. Initially, editors assumed such stories would upset readers, but they soon realized that many girls actually enjoyed emotional narratives. This change became more systematic with Tammy, which Pat Mills described as the beginning of the new wave of girls' comics. Unlike earlier comics, Tammy was based on market research among girls aged 8 to 13, which revealed that readers enjoyed stories that made them cry. Consequently, publishers deliberately introduced more tragic and emotionally powerful storylines. However, from the 1970s onwards, girls' comics gradually declined. Many periodicals such as Jackie, Patches, and Oh Boy reduced or abandoned comic strips and shifted their focus to fashion, makeup, popular music, celebrities, and relationships. This transformed girls from readers of comics into consumers of lifestyle culture. That is, the girls were made to consume this content, were made to buy all these stuffs, and at the same time, it reinforced the social construction that comics were primarily for boys, while girls were expected to read magazines centered on beauty, fashion, and popular culture. And finally, the author concludes by identifying the major flashpoints between gender and comics. In American superhero comics, the debate revolves around who owns the superheroine. That is, whether she exists only for the male readers or can also be appropriated and celebrated by the female readers. Another flashpoint is the tabula rasa or the blank slate theory, where creators like Marston believed comics could positively shape children, while critics like Waltham believed they could negatively influence behavior. The sexualization of female superheroes through revealing costumes and unrealistic poses also remains a major point of debate. In British girls' comics, the focus shifts from sexualization to the social construction of girlhood. These comics presented ideal models of how girls should behave, what careers they should pursue, and what aspirations they should have, with these constructions also varying according to class, as seen in Girl and Bunty. Like superhero comics, British comics were also based on the belief that children were blank slates who could be guided towards particular behaviors and values. The author further notes that over time, comics became associated with boys while magazines became associated with girls. Although this division was later challenged by the popularity of manga among female readers. Finally, despite featuring female characters and targeting the girl readers, both superhero comics and British girls comics were predominantly created by male writers, artists, and editors, creating a disconnect between female readers and the people who represented them. So that's it.